Welcome to part 2 of the refit of my aluminum fishing boat. Here I'm showing you the strength of the bulkhead that I made out of a piece of styrofoam and some laminated plastic sheeting. I'm pretty happy with it. It's working pretty well. So now it's time for the bulkhead just behind it. First, I need to make a good template. Cut it out and make sure our curves are good. Okay, so now it's time to trace it on to the styrofoam material. Okay, let's cut it out. That's looking pretty good right there.
Looks pretty good.
Now I'm gluing it on to the bulkhead that's existing. This piece of angle will support the cockpit floor. Now I'm going to put in a good solid ridge on top, just riveting it in to my edge. Those tabs will just hold the angles together and act as shims.
Got this floor ledge on here to support the floor, and that's bolted through to the old aluminum bulkhead behind this bulkhead. It's got 1/4 inch stainless steel bolts, and I've got spacers in there just wide enough so I can torque it down without compressing the foam. Alright, so I'm starting to sort of support things from the existing structure, and for these vertical stanchions, I'm using this sort of random extrusion of aluminum. I got them at a scrapyard for like $1 for like 10 of them. These are great because they're very stiff and very good in compression. They don't have much twist, and they definitely aren't going to buckle this way. So I'm going to go ahead and get this forward V. So I've actually got to do a compound cut. So I'll cut it to length, and then I've got to cut an angle for the V, and then I got to cut an angle for the way the hull kind of drops down into the bottom. For it to really fit halfway decent, you got to do kind of 2 angles. Fit right in there, like so. Right on the money. So I'm going to rivet this in, and then I'll put a stanchion just like this one against the inside. So things are a little tight in there. Got to use my stubby drill. Just barely fits. And it's harder than heck. Well, I've done just about everything I'm ready to do. I still have to really draw out where I'm going to have all my compartments, because I honestly haven't done that yet. So I got the 2 end bulkheads in. So that established the cockpit, and then I've got that peak in. Back here, it should be pretty simple. This big span out here is still a big question mark in my head, so more planning. So I need to draw this out and stop being so doggone creative. So I've got a tape measure from the very peak all the way to the back, and the idea is I'm going to take measurements at stations at the plane of the deck. I'm not going to do a full like hull design on this thing, but I am going to at least get some reference dimensions so I know how deep I can make my my compartments, and I know how wide I can make them and how much I'll have left for foam for flotation. So let's get at it.
Okay, so what I've done is I've got the length overall is 134 inches, and so I set locations of all the major bulkheads and old bulkheads and the framing I already have in place. And now I'm just going to measure across, get a distance, and then I'll true in a nice curve. Alright, well, this wouldn't be the engineered angler if we weren't doing some experimentation. A lot of folks say don't use this kind of stuff, the spray foam, because it isn't a sealed cell. It allows water to saturate it. I'm not saying anybody's wrong, but maybe somebody's wrong. So we're going to do a little bit of a test. I'm going to cut a piece off this PVC, and I'm going to fill it with the foam, and then we'll put this together and we'll stack some water on it and see if it leaks. That ought to fill itself up pretty good, and then we'll cut the edges off. Alright, well, it's a day later. This shop is a wreck from working on the boat. I did end up sketching off exactly what I want on the boat, and I'll show you that in a minute, but we gotta finish this experiment, and that's just gonna take just a little work. Let's do it. There you go. There's the end. Alright, so now there's no doubt that I don't have the skin over on it. And so if it goes through this, we know that it's not closed cell. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'll put this on there, and I'll put this on here to have a little bit of a head of water in there. And if it leaks, then I know I need to use something different. Alright, so that's going to work. I'm going to make sure it's dried. I still got some Gatorade in there. I'm going to dry it out really good, and it's got a nice semi-good seal, and that'll keep it from evaporating anything that flows into it. I guess I'll put water in it first, and if it doesn't leak right away, I guess I'm assuming it won't leak for a while. I may be very wrong. Let's see, it might leak right away. Alright. So it's not leaking right away, at least. Now I got to find a place to put it where I won't knock it over every 30 minutes. There we go, perfect. We'll see what happens in a day or so. Let me show you my set of hand-drawn plans for the boat deck and all the hatches. Okay, here it is, check it out. Let's go ahead and just move from bow to stern. Here is that V little hatch that I put in there. There's a little seat under there that I left, and that'll be the bottom of that hatch. It'll probably not be a dry hatch. And here is a double hatch, and this will be for putting in my tackle boxes. Each one can hold up to 5. This big blank area here, I'm going to reinforce this. So there's going to be a lot of stiffening members in here and vertical stanchions, because I want to put in a base for a seat. Back here you have a bait well / cooler, and on this side a live well / cooler. These are deep but not really huge, and then in between them there'll be a small locker that will house all the pumps. This area here is just the cockpit, and that's the cockpit floor. And then as you go back to the stern here, you'll have a battery box, and then this is another hatch meant just as a service hatch, because right here mounted to this bulkhead is my switch panel, and back here will be all the wiring. And then back here is the rear bilge, wet storage. And I think now I can get a little more enthused and get a little more done. Alright, this is like a couple of days later. Here's our little experiment. Still plenty of water in it, and no water in the bottle. So far, that foam doesn't allow water through. So we'll let it go for a couple of weeks, see what happens. Right now I'm calling BS on everybody's worry that this kind of foam absorbs water. So we'll see. Alright, so what you're looking at here is this is deck, or a portion of the deck. This is the portion of the box. And then you can see that's my hinge. There's going to be a 3/4 inch angle attached to it. A small PVC block that's going to be part of that rigid side where the hinge is going to be. Here there's going to be an angle, part of the framing. Then there's going to be a reverse angle here.
And then on the box, there's a whole frame in this direction that goes all the way around the box. And then there's a frame that goes all the way around the box. Let me show you what I've got done so far. This is one of the boxes I'm going to use for my hatches. I'm going to have 2 of these. And I built the frame around it out of this 1.5 inch angle. And if you look, I'm using that aluminum solder stuff that you can buy online. And then on the outside of this comes a reverse piece that I've actually mitered on a 45 and done the same thing. Let me show you where I am with that. The only preparation I did to the metal was to run it across the wire wheel. And that kind of roughed up the surface. That'll give it a good place to bond, and it cleans it off. There it goes. That's a pretty clean bead. That little glob I'll just have to grind off. You can see the welds. This thing's still kind of warm. And this will actually go over the outside of that skirt. Let me pull this off here and we'll check fit. Whew. All right, so that's pretty good actually. Looks pretty square. Perfect. It fits perfect. I just need to file back a little lump of solder on this corner and that corner. Round down the corners a little bit, and it fits in there pretty snug. And so now all I got to do is get all the rivets in it. And once it's riveted up, it'll look really tight. I've got it riveted in the corners where it doesn't capture the box, and so the box is just in there in friction. See? And if you're looking at this sketch here, you can see that part is the box. And so this is that. You see that L there, and then the other one coming out. That's what that is. Really, the design was the toughest part for me. Just coming up with a good way to do this in a way that I was capable of doing, because I'm not much for weld. Well, I'm not set up to weld aluminum, but the seam where the hatch connects with the deck will be over this channel. So when it rains, it'll fall into this channel, and then I'll put a couple of drain tubes on the downhill side, on the stern side of this hatch. Been a total of 4 days. Still no water. So before I give you an update of where we are on this, let me tell you it's slow going because this is really a bit of a dance between designing, building, and then rechecking your design. Because unless you've got a good CAD program and you know how to draw on CAD, and you can draw a complex shape like this boat hull, you're just going to be doing experiments like me and everybody else you see on YouTube doing this. Okay, here's what I'm talking about. This is the panel that I'm going to use. I was going to mount it on the vertical surface on that back bulkhead and be able to get to it from that hatch that I was going to build. But I was just not going to have enough room to be able to get my hands in there and actually work on it. So what I'm doing is I'm making a deck hatch and dropping this in. So what comes into play is the dimensions of all these pieces of aluminum, and just calculating out what gets used up by the framing for a watertight compartment. And so you'll go somewhere between 3.32, which is the maximum I figured here, of loss to your box, to 3 inches. So the lesson learned is that you really can't just design and blow and go. You gotta put a few frames up, make some additional measurements. The key here is that it's difficult to tell where where you're gonna have the right amount of depth in your hatches, because you've got this compound curve that goes this way and then comes this way, sweeping up towards the bow. So I've got the back portion redesigned in a way that I think I can do, and then that live well is just going to have to be a single live well. I'll have a little more room for tools, but you'll also have to consider flotation, because I'm probably adding about 150 to 200 pounds of just framing and decking with
an extra battery on board and an extra trolling motor, because I'm going to have one in the front and one in the back, I'm really adding a lot of weight. So I'm looking at a boat total weight somewhere between 400 and 450 pounds. So to calculate, if you're doing this and you need to know how much flotation you need, just remember water weighs 62.4 pounds per cubic foot. Just use 63 pounds. And then all you need to do is figure out what the weight of your boat is going to be, or weigh it. Take that weight, so for me 450 pounds, and then divide that by 63 pounds. That'll give you the cubic feet of foam you'll need. And so I need somewhere around 7, and that'll get me close.
From back to front, and I've got this framing in and solid. This is a T-beam that I put together. So it's 2 pieces of the 1.5" angle, and then I've got these extrusions as vertical stanchions that stiffen this really well. These aren't in place yet, but these are going to frame out the actual hatch back here for the bilge. And then here's where I was working out my battery boxes and the small box for my switches. So I've got the cockpit sole decked, or not decked but framed, and pretty well secured and supported. So I was lucky that I had this stiffener rib in the bottom, and I was able to place small pieces, small tabs, to get that nice and stiff in there. Now these sides are supported through 1/4" bolts through that, and then on this side I've got some plate just to support the foam a little bit, but what really is holding the whole thing is the heavy 1/4" bolts that probably are difficult to see, and then vertical supports to keep this from allowing it to move downward. So everything here is in shear, and so that supports that really well. And these little 3/4 angle pieces that go at the edge worked out perfect. They sort of blend that curve perfectly. So I'm pretty happy with my bulkheads. I would caution against anyone actually using them with the glue I used. I had to sort of re-glue. So if you're going to use this kind of arrangement where you're using a laminated material like this, make sure your glue for laminating is worth a doggone. That stuff I used sucked. Right, so now it's just a matter of moving forward, literally and figuratively, and getting more of this framing in. But first I need to clean this thing up. I'll catch you on the next video.